plug it into a
I have the
computer.
instructions upstairs. It has to do with...
Does it give you a type? No, it
How long will it record for?
245 minutes.
There's one out that I was familiar with. It'll record for 19 hours.
A digital recorder? What model is that?
No, someone told me, I said, well, they want a lot of money for it.
Yeah.
They have now that'll record for 19 hours.
For them it's the industrial strength, yeah.
Right.
Well, that'd be good for those of us who do those marathon weekends, huh?
I got a digital as 19 hours.
You do? Do you know what the brand?
Olympus.
Good quality hours?
It's about this big.
Like this?
Yeah, a little bit longer, flatter.
Interesting, well, 19 hours.
Yeah, probably about half that thickness.
Oh.
It was very expensive. I bought it in Bangkok for $200 there. Here was about $360 something, $367. I got it for about $188, something like that in Bangkok. A lot cheaper there than here.
Yeah, chocolate one.
Chocolate orange.
Something to do with chocolate. How to make chocolate.
Yeah.
When you buy it.
How to make a chocolate
Make it salty.
chocolate orange pie, cheesecake, chocolate orange cheesecake, and how to make the rum chocolate.
Yeah, that's right. So you've just been eating it, not feeling it.
That's right. You have to email me and ask me for it, and I'll attach it and
Before it
send
goes
it to
away.
you. Well, my partner's still doing the stem cell thing, so that's their main focus. So when they finish with that, then we'll buy the land and start developing the clinic there.
What city is
Oh, it'll be near Chiang Rai, Chiang Saen. Probably no more than 50 miles from the Laos border.
Have you been to Koh Samui?
Yes.
Is it near there?
No. Koh Samui's mid. Koh Samui's probably about 200 miles, 240 miles south of Bangkok. And Chiang Saen is probably 450, 460 miles north of Bangkok.
It's definitely a plane ride.
Oh, yes, definitely. It's only an hour's ride. It's like from here to San Francisco.
What's that going on in Thailand these days? Huh?
Yep. But I have some patients, or I have a patient in Aruba, and I visited him in February. I did my West Palm Beach workshop, and then went down to Aruba and saw the patients there. And one of my clients there said, Thailand's too far for me to go. He said, why don't you do it in Costa Rica? And I said, well, I wanted to originally do it in Costa Rica, but everything was so expensive. It would cost us $3 million to build. It would cost $1 million in Thailand. And he says, well, I'll build it for you. I said, okay. So he just picked up the phone and called somebody in Costa Rica and said, I need 100 acres. So they're working on it. Sounds like I have two clinics at one time. They start getting built. That'll be nice. Because then I'll be able to train, at least 12 people at each one. It's going to be like medical school. It's going to be an internship. They have to see the patients every day. That's the only way I can really teach them. I've tried teaching in a school environment; it just doesn't work. You've got to see the people. You've got to see what happens. Otherwise, it's like schools. They milk you. You go to school for 8 years, and then you go, internship for 4 to 6. And hello, you should be doing internship while you're learning, because they're just doing that to stretch it out and make more money, I guess.
It's like a pedigree for the AMA.
Yeah, right. So, so then once I get people trained, then I can go off and do something else, like make movies. So that's probably looking about 7 or 8 years from now. What I was experimenting, I was experimenting for the book, the detoxification book still. So right before, I had a month before I had to travel again. So I went on a heavy detoxification trial run. And again, I was trying to get rid of a lot of the toxicity that was built up in cereals, because I was a addict cereal eater as a child. And, pardon? Sugar Crisp and 4 tablespoons of sugar in the Sugar Crisp. It was already deathly sweet, So all that heavy sugar with the pasteurized dairy, and I'd go through a half gallon to a gallon of pasteurized milk a day. So I wanted to work at detoxing that again, and I thought, I got my first parasite almost 2 years ago, 2 years ago in July, when I forced that milk and fermentation and the sugarcane juice fermentation. And the tapeworm lives on sugar byproducts. And the only people who are mainly the people who have tapeworms are people who eat lots of grains, lots of cereals that have no value. They've been processed, like, children in Africa that have no food, and, we give donations to these companies to feed them, and then the companies go and give the money to Purina or General Mills or somebody like that, and they send over the worst cereals possible in water, cereal and water. So they make these hundreds of millions of dollars from all these donations and give the worst food they can to these children. And all that sugar product forces a tapeworm to eat up the excess sugars, because if they don't, they'll just rot. So the tapeworm is a good thing for that environment. So analyzing that, I thought, well, that tapeworm, I got tapeworm when I was in Cambodia and Vietnam, and eating that fermented sugar cane and fermented milk, and that forced the tapeworm that I had. And like I said, one other time when I talked about it here, I got this craving about 3 weeks later. I think it was three or 6 weeks. I have to look at my notes. And I ate, I had craving for onions, so I sat there and ate half of an onion, and next morning, I shed out 45 to 48 feet of a tapeworm, and I was devastated, because it took me 38 years, from after having the chemotherapy and radiation to get a tapeworm. I mean, any kind of parasite, because I was so poisoned from the radiation and the chemotherapy that no parasite could live in my body, and very few bacteria. So I had to do everything in the relationship of solvents, which are virus, and that's much more toxic and takes longer, and it isn't as efficient. So I decided, well, let's see what happens if I go on a milk diet with lots of honey in it, and let it get about 24 hours old before I do it. And I put it in a bowl of, hot water, but only about 105 degrees. That's the highest a cow's body temperature gets unless it goes into fever. So I'd leave it in there for about 2 hours and keep warming the water every 20 to 40 minutes. And then I did that, add a little cream to it also. So I was drinking anywhere from a half gallon to a gallon of milk a day with that honey in it. And after about 5 days, all of these, if you go on the internet and look under dermatological diseases or skin diseases, and you ask for photographs or pictures, you come up with all these different rashes, these different things come out of the body. And one of them, it says fixed drugs. And it has areas, it could be on the penis, it was on somebody's back and on their sides. And that's what I started throwing off. All of these drugs, like chemotherapy and everything. I started, it had lots of diarrhea from it, and it smelled like the chemotherapy I had, which was AZT back in those days. And it was outlawed. A year after they gave it to me, it was outlawed, and then they brought it out of the vaults again when AIDS came up, because they had billions of dollars of it in the vaults, and they deemed it too toxic to give to cancer patients. So without any testing, they said, "Oh, it works for AIDS." No testing. They just wanted to get rid of this drug, make money at it and kill people with AIDS, kill them. So anyway, I started detoxing the AZT, and I still have it coming out. I mean, big dry patches all over the place. My chest and back were just riddled with all these hard sores. And then they would come up as hard spots first, and then, like this one, comes up as a hard spot, and then it'll turn into a scab, and then, it goes deep too, rip it off. So I took a few of them, and I, lots around here right now, dissolved them in a distilled water solution, and then put them under an electronic microscope. And there was lots of crystallized structures that looked like in the AZT and other chemicals that I've had, and even mercury molecules in it. So I started pulling out all this stuff. So I've had this for a month now, and sometimes it gets so itchy, especially in my back. You'll see me rubbing my back up against the wall or a pole, going like this, because it's so itchy. So get some sun on it. Anyway, it was really, 2 weeks ago, it was intense. See how these hard things come out all over? And then they'll scab. Pardon?
I've got them coming up on my arm.
Yeah. But, all over my legs, all the way down to my feet.
And so the detoxing things that you've done up until now were not sufficient to bring this up to the surface?
Drugs are hard to get removed because they're so toxic. So that's what I was trying to see, how much I could get moving with this. And guess what? I haven't seen that. Then the parts of that back to the old story, parts of the tapeworm came up a few, maybe a month and a half, 6 weeks after I dispelled, with the diarrhea after eating the onion. Then I saw segments again, and then after about probably a total of 4 months, I shot out another 45 to 50 feet. And never saw them again. That was the end of it. No sections, no anything. Until I did this milk, fermented milk cleanse again with all that honey in it. I was putting a half a cup of honey per half gallon of milk with a little cream in it, and to force this thing on. So then guess what came up?
For me, just for one day.
Yeah, only one day, yeah. And guess what came up? Tapeworm showed up again. So, about a week ago, I saw sections of them coming out again, and every time I have a bowel movement, I see a few sections. So he's in there helping me eat up all the sugar-damaged tissue that's dumping into my lungs. That's just not drug-related. It's coming through my skin. So, and like I say, I don't suggest it's coming out everywhere. Here, I used to have psoriasis. Joe, recognize this kind of thing. I had psoriasis so bad, it's like on your hands, I had it on my elbows. I had it on my knees, ankles, everywhere. And I haven't had this kind of condition, 30 years, something like that. And this was, I didn't know that it was so much chemically related, the psoriasis. Because I thought psoriasis was mainly an organic disease that was from mainly cooking foods, especially cooking meats. And if it's like causing gout in some people and causing arthritis and rheumatism in others. But I found that when I did this and all the drugs started coming out and this started happening, in the tissue, the whole area was hard. Like there was no nerve in it or anything. It just deadened everything. And the scraping from here, this was the worst area. And the scraping from there showed the same kind of AZT and the other crystalline toxicities, from chemicals. This is mild to what it was. This looked like your hands when I first met you.
What if you created the hardening? Do you think it was the burning of the chemicals coming out?
Yeah, well, a lot of, you have to understand, when a chemical like that is already attached to dead cells, it's already a part of dead cells. The dead cells just moved out of the bones and out of the other tissue, and the ligaments and the tendons moved out to the skin to be to drop off, because it doesn't come off easily. It's got to flake off and die. But this whole area here is numb.
So you think detoxing, then you work on your filters first, and over a long period of time, because you do detox, it comes out at a cellular level. Is that?
Well, you can take it out the intestines, but can you imagine this going out through the intestines?
No,
you'd have peritonitis,
right,
and you'd be very sick and probably die. So it has to come out the skin. And that's what I've been trying to do, is get things out just to see what would happen. I'm not one that believes in forcing detoxifications, but because I think it's just be patient and let it happen over a 40-year period rather than forcing it. But when I see the damage that chemicals have done in people's bodies from medication, I start thinking, there's some things that are not going to be able to be removed unless you help it. So, and I knew that if you take a food that you've eaten a lot of and in a cooked or pasteurized form, where all the bacteria and natural products in it that allow it to break itself down and ecologically recycle itself, all those are destroyed in cooking. So if a compound in your body, if the structure in your body is made of that kind of compound, there's no way to get it out unless your body goes to extreme measures like creating virus, which are not alive. Those are just solvents made, by intracellular. So that's a long and hard process, and can the cells do it with those kind of drugs and chemicals in the system, which are meant to poison the body? AZT chemotherapy is meant to poison the body, to kill cancer cells. But like I said, in We Want to Live, for every one cancer cell kills 1 billion to 2 billion healthy cells. So it doesn't make any sense. So that's why I decided to, in the last 2 years, experiment with detoxification regimes on putting fermented products in my body that I ate heavily to detox them from the system. and boy, it sure is working. It works like a charm. Now, I did that a little bit of that in the 70s and 80s with grains. I ferment grains and then take the fermented juice and sometimes a little bit of the fermented grain and eat that.
Is that the Rejuvelat?
It's like a Rejuvelat, yeah. But I'd let it go further until little molds would form. They usually don't let it go that far. Because molds clean your body naturally like bacteria and parasites do. Your body resorts to making virus which are not alive, to dissolve things that are too toxic that would destroy and kill any bacteria, parasite, or fungus. Like Candida, Giardia, all of those. Those are natural, those are healthy, but they're for detoxification. Even athlete's foot, all of that stuff. So, I've been employing those things for the past 2 years, actually, to experiment and see what would happen. And it is feeding things, obviously. I didn't know I still had this much in my system, and I did not know it was systemic. Of course, it's going to be systemic. It goes right into my veins, so it's stored everywhere. The only place it hasn't broken out is on my face. I had a few spots on my face, and just a few right here on my neck, and some bleeding ones here, and then one on my ear here, which bled. But other than that, no, it wasn't. It wasn't. It was systemic, except on my face and scalp. Hi. So it's working, and that's why I'm going to write the book on detoxification, the next book, and that's for people who have, had exposure to lots of chemicals and things that were likely to store in the body and to not come out naturally out of the system.
MSM, is that
It's a terrible thing. It's sulfur. And sulfur dries out the system. It's like an antibiotic. They used to use sulfur as an antibiotic for kidney diseases and stuff like that, sinus diseases. MSM is a dangerous substance. Sure, it'll stop detoxifications, and it'll get rid of your symptoms, but it makes the body worse. Sulfur stores in the body. Sulfur can break sulfur down, especially when it's that concentrated. I find it in people all the time, and it creates serious mental problems later down the line or intestinal. Sometimes it's systemic. But it just dries out the system. And back in the early 70s, there was it was 60 minutes or 20 minutes, one of those, did a segment on women who spontaneously combust. It means they'll be standing. Pardon?
They showed it recently.
Really? Really?
Just women?
Only women have been known to. Only women were taking that kind of sulfur drug to do it. So,
What happened?
what would happen was they'd be standing there and they spontaneously went up in the flames. Not around any fire or anything, just went up in flames.
It's
So,
real, not science fiction.
no, this is real. And they showed, the burns of the body and everything. One woman, 2/3 of her body had been burned, or 2/3 or 3/4. It was pretty bad.
So she was dead.
3rd degree, no, she survived. And this was, I think, somewhere around 1969, 67 that happened to her. This show was built and done about 70, I think it aired in 72. And then they showed two other women who had gone through the same experience, but not as much as their bodies. So I was racking my brain out, at that time, trying to figure out what would cause those women to spontaneously combust. I knew it had to be a chemical related to nitroglycerin, that if it had a certain sulfur base, as soon as the oxygen would touch it, it would go up in flames. So that was a year later when I figured that out. So I thought, I wonder. So I called a friend of mine who was the head of publicity at MGM, and I said, listen, I need this to find out who these women were. I need their names or phone numbers or addresses where I can write or call them. So he gave me the number of the show. Like I said, I don't remember if it was 60 Minutes or 2020. And I called the show, and they got permission to give me the numbers. So I called the three women, and the one who had the worst burns had been on sulfa drugs for 32 years for kidney problems. The other woman who was next in that was at, I think, a third of her body burned. She'd been on the drugs for 27, sulfur for 27 years, sulfur drugs for 27. And the woman who had burned about a quarter of her body, or a little less, 20% of her body, had been on for 13, 17 years, something like that, sulfur drugs. Sulfur is not a natural thing. No element in nature is high in the body except for calcium, potassium, and phosphorus. But the potassium and phosphorus don't hold up in the system. They're very transient. Calcium is more stable in the system. Sulfur is a very small part of the human body, or any animal's body. And if it gets high, it will cause dryness, severe dryness. Most of your Dristans, your antihistamines, are full of sulfur. Can you imagine the body's trying to get rid of the poisons through the mucus discharge, and you're going to dry it up with sulfur? What's going to happen? The poisons that the body is trying to reject with the mucus are going to remain in the tissue. So you're going to have more advanced and chronic disease as the years go by, because you're not going to be cleaning out the system.
Which is why, like my father, that's got these sinus problems, he did all the antihistamines that keep making it worse.
Exactly.
And so what he needs
progressively
to do,
gets worse and worse.
And what
He needs to just let the mucus flow. You know, like me, I haven't had a cold in 3 years. I'm throwing a party. You know, because I like colds, because that means you've got enough health that you're using bacteria instead of virus. Again, viruses are not alive. They're just solvents that dissolve matter. And if you're using a solvent, like if you're cleaning your driveway of grease, you have a water base with a solvent. And what happens, you wipe it up, and then it gets into the bucket, and you have this bucket of all this water, maybe 2.5 to 3 gallons of water, and it's all contaminated. So it's a lot to cleanse and flush out of the system. If your body's using bacteria or parasites, they consume the degenerative tissue, and they put out a fraction of it as a excrement. So let's say, like a parasite can eat 100 times its weight in 24 hours and have 1% feces. That's like us eating 100 pounds and having a 1 pound, feces the next day. I don't have to handle 100 pounds. I only have to handle a pound. That's the way the body works. And if it's a bacteria, they can do about 50 times their weight in 24 hours and have about a 5% secretion, sometimes up to 8. So they even reduce it. We will eat 14 pounds and have a pound, excrement the next day, a whole pound excrement. So it's much better to have bacteria and parasites rather than virus. So this is the first bacterial cold that I've had in 3 years. I pray for them, because it's so much cleaner. There are less symptoms. It can even be asymptomatic except for the mucus flow. Of course, it's partially in my brain, so if I cough, the brain hurts when I rattle it. So
if you get a cold, it means your body is
detoxified.
So there's no such a thing as too many pools? Because I went to 3 of them in the last few months.
No, that's wonderful. That means your body's dumping wonderfully. There's a team of doctors that I lectured to about 22 years ago at Yale who were involved in a study that found that 80% of cancer reverses immediately following a cold or a flu. 80% of the cases of cancer reversing immediately followed a cold or a flu.
Can I ask you a question specifically about cancer? The reason why I'm here actually is because my brother's girlfriend, they just found out she has lung cancer. And it seems to be pretty severe actually. Not to the bones yet, but they're still going through tests. Do you have any kind of suggestion to face this kind of cancer?
That's a hard one. It's a very difficult one if it's advanced. The two that I don't like to handle because they're so difficult is lung and esophageal. Lung because the lungs keep filling up with fluid, and it takes medical intervention to get the fluid out of the lungs, and they'll usually, puncture the lungs and then pull it out. And you keep poking the lungs like that, it doesn't help. So it's very, very difficult. Only 60% of those that I've worked with reverse. Medical profession, none reverse unless they remove the lungs. And then there's, usually a 5 to 6 year period when they're dead. Years, that's the longest they live. But about 90% of them die within a few years of getting lung cancer. Usually if they get treatment, they'll die within a few months unless they have surgery.
Right. She's against any kind of chemotherapy or stuff like that.
Or, radiation.
Or radiation. And I talked to her about that. I'm going to, she's in Italy.
But still, if her lungs keep filling up with fluid, which it does to help eliminate it, she has to be able to cough it up to get it out of the body, or else it has to be aspirated through medical means, and that's complicated. And that creates sores, which makes more fluid collect in the lungs. So it's difficult. Esophageal is bad because it'll choke off the vocal, the esophagus, the ability to breathe and eat. You can't breathe and read, you're dead. So that's a difficult. The worst case I had was after it was removed. The man had esophageal cancer all the way down. So what they did was they had maybe 3 inches of esophagus left. So they cut it all out, put his stomach up in his shoulder, and his lungs way over here, so it was all attached right into his throat. So the guy was on constant meds, and he was in constant pain. And he died, even though he went on the diet and did it 100%, it only allowed him to live for another year and a half, year and 3 months. So he should have been dead, probably within a month and a half. But he suffered, the whole time, even on the diet. It reduced his pain by 50%, so he was taking less meds. But it was still very difficult, a difficult situation. Then there's some people who catch it early enough, and they go on the diet, and they'll get colds and flus and keep bringing the stuff up properly with the mucus instead of water. They make it, So we just,
By going on the diet, you mean just follow the therapeutical diet that you have on the book?
Right, right.
Just plain like that. You don't have any kind of suggestions specifically with cancer?
Well, if she has fluid already collecting, then egg every half hour in her waking hour, and a little honey and butter in between. And that's what she should eat until she gets the strength, until she builds the mucus instead of fluid. It should be almost exclusively that.
You said
Eggs, raw eggs.
Every half hour.
Like one every half hour. And maybe a teaspoon of honey and butter, equal parts of honey and butter. teaspoon to a half a teaspoon to a whole teaspoon every 15 minutes after each egg.
How about veggie juice like celery?
Cause water to build up in the lungs. Unless she sips it.
Right.
Sipping it's
Is there a
okay.
Is there a way she could have a consultation with you? She comes to the States?
She comes, yeah. Well, it depends on when she would come. Did you email me about Italy?
I did, right.
Okay.
I did, and I decided to come today because I didn't have any answers, so I wanted to find out from you directly. About the connections that she could possibly find in Italy to begin with, I was wondering if
Well, I sent you the email with Massimilio, his email address. I sent you that.
Oh, you did send him the
3 o'clock in the morning?
Okay.
You
Great.
probably haven't seen
Great.
it.
Thanks, I haven't seen it yet. Great.
Going back to that sulfur,
But he's not in, he moved to Switzerland. So he's an Italian living in Switzerland, but I'm sure he knows people in Italy.
All right.
Because he was trying to get the book published in Italian. He's still working on it, too.
when you were talking about the sulfur, what about the sulfur dioxide that comes out when you go to hot pools? Or in the Hakumba water?
Well, that's very small.
That's what I'm just
That's
asking.
not
You're not going to worry about it.
Yeah, that's not a concentration. Plus, there are other minerals involved.
Yeah.
When they give you a MSM or a supplement or an antibiotic of MSM, of sulfur, it is concentrated sulfur.
Okay, I just
Did you ever see Time Bandits? Concentrated evil? Don't let any of that get by it. Concentrated evil. And that's what chemicals are. That's what drugs are. They're concentrated chemicals that will disrupt the system. And that's why they use them, because they disrupt the system. They usually create an asymptomatic condition.
I have 3 kind of short questions.
Well, I'm going to go around,
Okay,
so
great.
we'll start over here with Barbara.
You just wanted to go back to that egg that you gave me and what you give to other people, like at least a dozen eggs a day, no juice except every 4 or 5 days, milk and yolk, the other stuff, the curded milk in the evening, kefir, and not having the moisturising liquid. What is the purpose? And I looked up about your eggs in the books and everything. I reread it just to check. What is the aim of that?
Well,
The eggs.
usually when somebody is very, very ill, they're not digesting their food properly. So they can't digest complex nutrients. They can't digest meat. They can't digest sometimes even milk, even though that's already liquid. When you look at an egg, all of the fat and all of the proteins in complete liquid form. So there's almost, just a fraction of the digestive time. It takes 10 minutes to completely digest an egg.
Wow.
Completely digested, absorbed and already in your blood, in your nervous system, everywhere in your system. Milk can take hour, couple of hours, 5 or 6 hours even. Meat, 16 to 20 hours.
Raw.
Even raw. Because it's hard substance that has to be broken
1
down.
to 2, but maybe 4.
So if you're eating eggs, you don't have to spend all that energy in digestion. And you can heal and you can cleanse and you can recuperate. That's why that woman I talked about, I gave as an example in the recipe book, that had emphysema that was supposed to die that weekend, and she'd been on oxygen for almost 2 years and had been diagnosed 7 years previously and hadn't been out of the bed much in 2 years, was out of the bed and walking around and off the oxygen. In 2 days of eating eggs, 66 eggs over a 2-day period, 33 a day. So the eggs can do that. But that's the only food that I can see that can create that miracle kind of experience with almost everybody who eats them. There are other people, you can give them combinations or selective foods, and it'll change their whole life instantly, but it doesn't work on everybody or most people. But the eggs will work on almost everybody. People with environmental sensitivities that come to me, and they can't eat anything. They can maybe drink water, or they'll have an allergic reaction to even water. Put them on the eggs, and they can live on the eggs.
And the sulfur in the eggs is not a
It's not a concentrated sulfur. It's a lot of sulfur, but it's within a balance with the fat and the protein. If it were a problem, you better believe I would be a mess.
I'm trying to understand why it's not a problem, so I can apply that logic in other situations.
Right.
So you don't just put the juice...
In milk, the milk's very high in sulfur too.
Right.
But it's not a problem. It's just not as... it's just not as digestible, as easily absorbable and utilizable as an egg.
So it's not necessarily the context of the other minerals and stuff being present. It's more the concentrated dose is not so high. The reason why milk and egg sulfur is not such a problem is the dose level, not the context of the other minerals and the protein.
Well, yeah, it has to do with all of it.
All of that.
Yeah,
oh.
all of it. Yeah, all of
Complex.
it. Yeah, very complex. And man doesn't, has his butt up, his head up his butt because he can't even make anything grow. He can't make an apple from scratch or a seed from scratch that grows. He always has to use other elements of nature. And to think that he's smart enough to make something a balance is absolute stupidity. Because their intelligence, micro-intelligence, microcosmic and macrocosmic intelligence that are all partaking in the exchange of building something. Isn't this one human brain that's working it all out? That's pure stupidity. And when you cook something and you chemically treat it, you've gotten rid of all of those other cosms. And you're just working on one. And that's mainly where plants live. Most of those things you can feed plants. But if you put too much sodium somewhere, you'll kill certain plants. You put too much sulfur somewhere, you'll kill plants. Do the same thing with plants. But plants eat rock. That's what they do. They eat non-bioactive substances. That's what they do. And the rain comes down, dissolves rocks, and they eat it. But we know that trees and plants will grow even faster and fuller if you're using biochemical mulch, where there is decaying vegetation or human excrement or animal excrement around. It'll thrive.
It breaks down the water soluble level. That's how
Correct.
works.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for example, I have a fern that was an indoor fern. The container was about this big, and it was about this full. And I planted it in my garden because nothing else. The deer and the gophers eat everything. They don't leave anything for me. So the only thing I can grow is peppermint or spearmint. I got spearmint growing all over, and this fern. And the jasmine, they don't seem to eat that. One year they ate a lot of jasmine. Most of the time they don't eat the jasmine. So I planted this one little bitty fern out there about 3 years ago. So I didn't fertilize it at all the first year, and it grew. It probably doubled in its size. This fern spread. And the next year I thought, I'm going to see what will happen if I punch it with a lot of human nitrogen. So I collected my urine and I collected my eggshells, and I blended the eggshells until they were a powder. I mixed it with my urine and took some Terramin clay and put a little bit of that in there. And then I went around. I took a container with a lid and poked holes in. Went around sprinkling it all over the dirt around there. Everything doubled, that year. So then last year, I thought, well, I'm not going to put the hole in the cap. I'm just going to dump the stuff. Just dump it on the ground. Always do it in February at the, low season when it's cold. And when it's, things aren't thriving at that time. They're all about to come out in the springtime, about to blossom. And, I was no holes in. I'm just pouring it on the dirt, and it quadrupled. The fern now goes from that wall to here, and it goes from that post to here. That's 1 year growth from when I just poured it on. Now, if you take urine from an animal that eats cooked food, like human urine or dog urine that's grown up on Alpo and canned foods, it will destroy. It will actually burn and ruin the roots, not help it grow. It will destroy growth. And here I saw it's causing all this tremendous growth.
And there's an irrigation system that was helping with the water part.
Pardon?
That fern was getting water from an irrigation system?
No, it has a sprinkler system.
Right.
So it gets water about every 3 days, 10 minutes, 15 minutes every 3 days.
Yeah, going back to this other then with the eggs, and you say don't have too much vegetable juice. Is the reason, just give me a quick reason for that?
Well, I found that if you have lots of eggs, that it causes a certain amount of acidity because of the dryness, and it starts pulling out a lot of toxins. And by having the green vegetable juice, it helps replenish and rebalance the system.
But you don't want too much. You didn't want it every day. Why
right.
is that?
Because then it interferes with the digestion of the eggs.
Because it's too alkaline is against the acidity.
I can theorize that.
But you don't know.
But I don't know. I can theorize why.
Yeah. But you found once every 4 days is better than once every day.
Well, it depends. 3 days. 3 to 4 days.
Okay.
Some people can go 5 days without eating it. Yeah. With having a juice. Pardon?
Not every day.
No, you don't want it every day. I found it does interfere.
Oh, with lots of eggs.
Yeah. When you're eating like an egg every half an hour to an hour.
Yeah.
And that's mainly what you're eating.
Just quickly then, following on from this alkalinity, everyone now writes books and says alkalize or die. If you're drinking alkaline pH water like 7.4 to 8, you're not going to have cancer, etc., because cancer and all the chronic diseases of the day are a result of acidity in the system. That means less oxygen in the system. Can you just quickly, because everyone who comes to people who are in health will say this is what's being spread. What do you have to say about this?
Theoretical bullshit. That's you said a short answer, that's theoretical bullshit.
Yeah.
There's no evidence of that. You take a look at the clinics like the Optimal Health Institute here near San Diego, or where is it?
It's in Lemon Grove.
Lemon Grove.
Yep.
And you've got one in Florida.
Yep. You've got one
2/3 of those people drop dead in less than 5 years.
No.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Really?
Yes.
No.
Absolutely. Yep. Okay. 2/3 drop dead within 5 years from that experience, and most of them do very badly. There used to be several therapists there that found out my method worked better. So undercover, they had their meat and everything illegally in their rooms in little coolers or little bitty refrigerators, and they were sending people to me. One woman they sent had multiple myeloma. and she had just come from the ISO clinic to there, and nobody gave her hope. I put her on a diet. In 30 days, her multiple myeloma was reversed. That kind of alkalinity is, that whole idea is a stupid concept. It is really a ridiculous concept.
Well,
They're just justifying their own. Pardon?
Acidic conditions can cause problems. So you're saying it's a balance between the two, not just extremely one or the other?
No, I would say probably you're going to get more disease if you go on alkaline for a long time for the human body, because the human body is like all other animals. I mean, all other omnivore and carnivore animals are mainly acidic. Their urine, their saliva is acidic. The children should not have vegetable juice under 16 years old unless they absolutely crave it. And it will disrupt their whole digestion because it causes over-alkalinity. Your digestive juices and bacteria must be acid in your digestive tract to digest any animal products. We know we're not vegetarians. Very few people can sustain human life on vegetation. That's why there are very few vegetarians that don't get cancer and do very well on it. And I've only met 8 out of about 3,000. 8 people who could accomplish being pretty good vegetarians. They were even athletic, but that was because they had all this high testosterone, high adrenaline, and high thyroxine. And even a couple of them had high thymus production. But that's what generated their health. So they were naturally very over-acidic because of those hormone secretions. So they could take all that alkaline food and do okay with it. But the longest term when I met, he was on that raw food hygiene program, a raw food alkaline with no meat, no eggs, no dairy, for 52 years, and then all of a sudden his whole spine started disintegrating. He used to come to the health shows that I did, and he'd be one of those hecklers out in the audience, and he said, well, I've been vegetarian for 47, 48, every year he'd show up that I was speaking. 7 years. And then all of a sudden at 52, he didn't show up anymore because he was doing my diet. Because his spinal cord just started disintegrating. He was in excruciating pain. He couldn't live. He was, he became an invalid. And then when he started eating the raw meat and raw dairy, well, he mainly ate raw eggs and raw meat and kept the dairy down. He still has a hell of a prejudice against dairy, but he'll use the butter. And that he was back on his feet within about 6 weeks. So, but he doesn't tell people these things. He tells people to still do the hygienic vegetarian diet. Yeah, he eats the meat, he eats, some dairy and eggs. But that's a mentality. So we're not vegetarians. We need acid bacteria. We need acid digestive juices to break down meats and dairy and eggs. That's the nature of it. And if you're trying to digest fiber, it's not going to happen because we have 2.5 times less digestive tract than an herbivore. We have one stomach, the duodenum and the stomach are one in us, and the herbivores have from 2 to 4, and they have 60,000 times more enzyme to disassemble the cellulose molecule to get the protein and the fats. We can't do that, So, their B12 goes down and they're sucking up this processed soy garbage as their protein. And 50% of my cancer clients were long-term vegetarians. 50%. You know, people like, McCartney, what was her name? Linda McCartney. I'm vegetarian and I'll never get cancer. She died of the most aggressive breast cancer there is.
And that was why? Are you linking her cancer to her vegetarianism?
To vegetarianism, absolutely. Absolutely. You're alkalinizing the body and you're feeding it bad proteins, processed soy, and nuts, grains that you can't digest. You know, if you're a bird, you can digest nuts. A lot of you're a squirrel, but we're not those. So
all this undigested matter, like, created this toxic environment in her body?
Well, the soy has a lot of toxic elements. It has estrogen precursors, and it forces the female body to, even male bodies, to make a lot of it. So it forces a lot of brain tumors and a lot of uterine and ovarian cancers.
I had a breast lump disappear when I stopped doing soy milk.
There you go. So all that alkalinity is not what we're supposed to be. I use the vegetable juice because we're so toxic. We have so many acids. We're over acidic from all the cooked foods that we've had.
See, that's what confuses
So
me.
that helps balance it a little bit. We put in those alkalinizing minerals. They attach to the acid minerals and can neutralize them so it doesn't interfere with us. But children, you know, even though they're eating cooked diets, you know, only need maybe, you know, a half a cup once every 2 weeks. Even if they're eating cooked foods. If they're eating raw foods, unless they were born to a very, very toxic mother, and those toxins went from the mother to the infant, to the fetus, only they should have just a minute amount of vegetable juice. I got one 2-year-old on the diet, and she has signs of she looks like she was born to a vegetarian woman. Now, the mother had been vegetarian for 6 years before she went onto my diet. Ultra skinny. Well, she didn't recover enough, and I told her, don't have a baby. Now you wait 7 years till you've been on the diet. She had a baby, I think she got pregnant within 6 months that she gained all this weight. She felt so good, and she said, I'm healthy enough to have a child. I said, no, you're not. So she had this baby, and this baby looks like it's been a 20-year vegetarian. More than half of its body is full of dead cells.
How can you tell that, Aajonus?
Pardon?
How can you tell the body half is built?
In the irises, if there's a lot of scar tissue, and I can see how much of the body proportion, and 50% of that child's body is dead cells.
Wow, that's terrible.
Yeah. And another vegetarian that had a baby, well, she had a fetus growing, and it miscarried at about 5 months old. The baby was see-through. You can look at it, it looks like a plastic baby, translucent. You can see the veins and the arteries and all the different parts as if it were this plastic model. And when we looked at the tissue, and it was all nerve tissue, she had spinal cancer and brain cancer. So her body took all these dead cells and built them into the fetus to get them out of her system. She called him her angel because she had something like 60 tumors in her spinal cord and brain altogether. And she reversed, so many of those cancers dissolved during that pregnancy, but the body took those cancer cells and put them dead nerve, brain cells, the neurons, and built them into this fetus. So it was all nerve. This baby was built out of tumorous nerve tissue that was translucent. It's the wildest thing I've ever seen. Wow. So the body does phenomenal things, and when a mother comes off of vegetarianism, just because she gets on the diet, or anybody gets on this diet, they're not infallible. You have to be careful. This woman had that baby way too soon, and now the baby shows signs of anemia, can't digest well. She acts just like a 40-year-old vegetarian.
But she's got to be better off than a vegetarian having a baby, as a vegetarian still being a
Oh,
vegetarian.
yeah,
They must be far worse.
Well, this woman's a smoker too. She never stopped smoking, so that added to the problem.
So there's hundreds of thousands of vegetarians having babies.
Yep. But this woman is a smoker too, so that compounded to it. So there was a lot of damage in this child. Now, at 2 years old, the child's going for the raw meat and is starting to gradually move out of that. So it's thankfully she's able to. Because some children who are raised like that in a vegetarian type system, the meat repulses them, and they will never eat it and never recover properly. But this child, all of a sudden, 2 weeks ago, just started devouring the raw meat.
Why does it
Because they have so much alkalinity in their intestines and systems that they don't have the acids to break down the meat, so it repulses them. A lot of vegetarians can't go into eating meat within the vegetarian diet. If they continue to eat salads and drink a lot of juices, the meat repulses them because they don't have the digestive juices to handle the meat. Will start vomiting, the food will pass through, go into diarrhea, all kinds of problems. Okay, you were going to ask a question.
Actually, Aajonus, I've been on a trek similar to yours, but not nearly as long, and I've studied several different people. And so I'm really just interested in the parallels that you have to offer to all the other people I studied. And I've taken a lot and thrown it away and taken the good and saved it. So I just have to compliment you. I think you're right on the right track. If I could say anything at all, I'd say I've learned that life exists on a physical, a mental, emotional, and a spiritual plane, and they need to be in balance. So I would treat everything in a balance like that.
Good.
That's what I would have to say. So it's not really a question, it's just a compliment.
Okay. Do you have a question?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm interested in what works, not what's theoretical. So, like I said, when I wrote the book, all of my books, I was putting in there what worked, and all the explanation was just theory. This is probably why it works. But we're not that smart, to be able to say this is absolutely what it is. But people like science, they like logic, and they like rationale. So to me it's all bullshit, and I'll give it to them if that's what they need. But that doesn't really mean that is the reason. The meat works. The meat helps heal the body. The eggs help rebuild and revitalize the body faster than anything else. The butter helps lubricate the body and keep it, good and solid and firm. And the cream soothes and relaxes the body. So these things are the key answers that I have, and how to combine it, to get people out of diseases. Is how I manipulate a diet to make it work.
You feel better, there's hope. Everything starts rolling in the right direction.
Absolutely, yeah. So I didn't mean not to give your sister-in-law any hope, but it's one that scares me because it's so difficult. It's hard. When you see a cancer patient with lung cancer trying to get up the stairs, are exhausted, their lungs are filling up, they can't breathe. They're stopping and panting, and that's the way it is. And it could take them 3 to 5 years to get through that stage. Will they get through that stage without running to the doctors, and the doctors are promising this, oh, well, we'll cut it out and you'll be okay, or we'll give you radiation therapy and you'll be okay, or chemo and you'll be fine. And they always tell them this. And, it's a lie. It's an outright lie. And they usually end up with a miserable life and dead, within a couple of years. If they've had all three. Surgery, I've seen, with lung cancer, I've seen less deaths, and probably the medical therapy. The surgery helps people live a lot longer. One woman had, I don't know if you remember who she is, Lorene Tuttle. She's like my second grandmother and very good dear friend of mine. And she got lung cancer in 1969. And she had, and this is just when I was barely a cripple myself. She wouldn't eat the raw meat, she would eat it rare, but she wouldn't eat it completely raw. So with that, she only had 3 lobes of a lung. That was half of her lungs gone. And she did quite well. Also, I knew John Wayne, and John Wayne had just 1 lobe left, and he lived 3 years with just 1 lobe. But he was an alcoholic. He just stayed numb all the time. Destroyed all bacteria because he was drunk all the time. But he was able to survive that. But he was not a happy person, and nobody liked him because when he was drunk, he was just obnoxious, constantly obnoxious. So people can survive with medical therapy, but what is the quality of life? But the surgery, although Harbin B. Jones says that he thought that surgery was the worst therapy that you could do, I think that surgery is the least harmful of the therapies, in my experience.
Of medical intervention.
Yeah, of medical intervention. So, in a case of cancer, there's definitely 60% chance you'll live doing this diet. And if you go with the medical profession, it's probably 17% chance you'll live over 5 years. And that's why the medical profession pulls out this magic number 5 years. Do you know that if you reach the magic number 5 years, you're considered cured of cancer? No matter if in the next day or next year you get it again, they consider it a whole new case of cancer. Which they cured you the first time. It's an absurd thing.
Are they playing on cell regeneration? Like a 7-year cell regeneration? So they're saying after 5 years you've gone through a new set of cells?
Yeah, and it takes 7.5 years to do it one time thoroughly in the body. So it's all pharmaceutical, double talk to get you to do what they want you to do.
I've heard ducks fart underwater, too.
They do. I've seen them. I've seen ducks fart underwater.
I've seen ducks fart underwater, too.
That's true, they do. Especially if you're giving them a lot of nuts. Ducks don't eat nuts, but ducks don't go out and find nuts, but they'll eat them if you feed it to them. And boy, they have the worst diarrhea and farts that you can believe, and they'll stink up a lake real quickly. They do great with grains, but for some reason, nuts and ducks don't get along. Chickens do okay, and other birds do okay, but ducks don't do well with nuts. They may be like humans; they don't have the enzymes to break down the phytic acid properly. Do you have a question?
Well, I'm heading off to India in August for a month, and it's an ashram atmosphere, and it's vegetarian.
Speak to that man. He did it last year
I
in
know.
Burma.
He was in a place where they had fried food and sugar and all that. This is a little bit
Vegetarian.
Indian vegetarian, rice and dal and vegetables. I don't know if they even have some salads. It's very, it's an ashram that's very Western oriented in air conditioning and so they have salads.
Well,
So,
try to find some dairy.
I was thinking
They accept raw dairy.
See if they could find an egg.
They may be against eggs. I'm not sure, but you can ask.
No, they have hard-boiled eggs. What ashram is that?
It's the one university in Chennai, southern India. So I'm just wondering if there's anything else. I'll bring butter with me and see if we can get some locals. But the focus is they're not going to want you to go running around trying to find dairy places in Royal because you're going to be focusing on the program.
Yeah, but you get there a day earlier.
Well, you get there a week early to
scope
it out.
There you go. And then you can find it. Just go to your outdoor markets. All Asian countries have outdoor markets. The peasants come in with whatever they grow or, butcher or whatever, and they bring it. You can get fish on the street, you get worms and everything. It's great. Rotten eggs. Get all that good stuff. And
it took me about 3 weeks. It's a concern of mine. I don't want to be moaning in my bed.
Like a duck, right?
I know for me, that if I would have done that kind of research that Aajonus suggested, I would have found raw coconut cream that was made on the street.
Yep.
They were making a quart of it. It was like made cream out of like 6 or 7 coconuts. Make it a huge. And then the eggs, and then and lots of water buffalo roaming around India, and they make the best dairy, I think. You can find, and then there are some dairy-based Ayurvedic foods like what's the rata, or what's the one with the cucumbers and yogurt, things of that nature, and you find a raw version of it. I don't know. And then you find chicken. Find raw chicken.
Just marinate it in lemon juice, and it'll keep, for a long time.
Yeah, and that's what I lived on. I would get them to give me some of that. The place I was staying was a hassle. It was like considered an incredible taboo of baking all these precepts with this chicken. But they'd give me chicken, and I would marinate it in my room in lemon juice, and they would only give me 4 eggs a day. And that's how I stayed. And I'd say 2/3 of the people that I was with, out of 120 people, got sick. Probably 20% of them had to leave because of it.
Yep.
And another half of them had to put on antibiotics.
Yep.
So they thought. And the only way I got through it, I thought, was through raw eggs.
That's right.
So you could eat a dozen eggs a day and not worry too much about everything else. And the coconut.
But you're going to lose a lot of weight if you just eat eggs.
Yeah.
So that's only to find. We find some of that dairy to find with it.
I find water buffalo.
When that makes the acidic for if I could find some salad.
Well, all you have to do is eat a salad the last thing at night if you can't get juice. But usually at those ashrams, they juice.
I was just in Hawaii, and it was a hassle to find raw dairy. I didn't take the time to find out. I went down to Pangaea finally, and with some guy at the street had raw butter.
Yeah.
But I was living off of chicken and lemon and ahi. I was doing all of that. Eventually, I was drinking too much ahi. I was pretty sad on that. But and I was doing a lot of raw eggs. And then I looked around for raw honey. I had lots of raw honey in Hawaii. But I got a couple bad batches of honey that was cooked, even though I said it was raw. And that actually went pretty good. Is there raw cream on the Big Island? On the island?
Well, you can get raw milk, and you just have to separate it.
You go find it.
Yep. You get the milk, and you separate it. You get the cream, and then you make cheese with the other and drink away. It's a good balance. It's funny how dairy can be. You can take milk, and you can separate the cream and have the cream, or make it into butter, and then you take the whey from the, the buttermilk, and you take the whey for making the cheese, and each one of them favors a particular disease. And if you separate them, they become an individual remedy. Like the whey is great for arthritis, for rheumatism, gout, stuff like that. You get sore, you get stiff, you drink a cup of that whey, it's almost gone by the next day. And then, you have a half a cup a day after that to keep it away completely. Depending on if you're detoxifying a lot of urea in your body, then you're going to need about a half a cup to a cup a day, depending on the size of your size of body. And the cheese absorbs toxins because cheese is dried. There's no active enzymes in cheese, so there's no microbes, no bacteria to help the enzymes facilitate enzyme activity. So cheese is a detoxifier. It'll absorb poisons. It'll help magnetize them out of the blood, the lymph, and the neurological system as those fluid channels run through the stomach and intestine. So it just attracts it out, and you get all those heavy metals and toxic substances into the bowels or in the stomach or in the small intestine, locks onto them, and will pass it out without digestion. If you add honey to the cheese and eat honey directly with the cheese, it turns it into a mineral supplement. And then, of course, the butter is the only thing that will lubricate the bones and the skin, and the tendons and the lymph system very well. And the cream is the only thing that will soothe and completely take care of the nervous system. So even though you can, other elements of food you can't separate like that and then have a favorable thing happen. Now, if you take a tribe like the Fulani of the Samburu and you start separating those too much and too often, then it'll cause them imbalances. Now, the Himalayan, what are they called? That group of people that lived up high up in the Himalayas, that were mainly dairy eaters. They ate a lot of yogurt and a lot of kefir and a lot of cheeses. Well, they could handle that kind of diet because when they ate meat, they ate it cooked. And they cooked meat maybe once every 2 weeks. I can't remember what the name of that.
Not the Hunzes.
Hunzes. Yeah. The Hunzes. So they could maintain that diet as long as they were cooking their meat. But if they got rid of the cooked meat and ate raw meat, their whole diet would have to change. They couldn't be that constant base. So,
What would that be raw meat?
they would not be able to eat all that fermented food, all that separated dairy that they did. It helped balance them. Because eating cooked meats causes urea to form in the ankles and feet and throughout the body and joints. Because it's much too acidic. It causes putrefaction. And of course the whey helped to break that down. The lactic acid helped to break that down, the urea from all of the acids that would form. So there are diets that are conformed to exactly a balance within themselves.
Like the sauerkraut and the German diet.
Right.
Or their cooked food.
Yeah. And, also the Hunzes fermented some vegetables also to counterbalance their cooking. And Sally Fallon does it, Sure, you have to eat those. If you're eating steamed vegetables, you're going to need some fermented vegetables to help break that down. It's the whole detoxification thing I was talking about. You eat a food that's fermented that you're eating cooked, and it'll help deliver the bacteria that is natural to it to ecologically recycle it, to break it down when it's no longer valuable and take it back into another form where it can take on a new life form. But when you cook it, you've destroyed those bacteria to do that. That's why it's so good for packaging. Things don't ferment easily. They don't rot easily. They don't gain fungus easily because they're cooked, so they'll stay packaged longer. And if they're dehydrated and cooked, it's like eating leather or wood. Not a diet for us at all. So anyway, farmers markets. Go to your farmers markets, and you'll find a lot there. And if they don't have it, you ask. You find out what is the word for, raw. Now, if you go into, let's say, Thailand, and you say, Nui dip, raw meat. Now, Nui dip to them can mean, usually by the way they eat now, the old tribes people would know it. Nui dip to them means raw meat like we eat it. But Nui dip to most of the younger Thais means you're eating meat alone without anything dressing with it, but it's still cooked. So I have to say, Nui dip, sut, my suk means no cooking. I have to go through this whole thing to describe it. So you have to learn how to say to get exactly specifically what you want.
Worship on your Hindi.
Yeah. And let's say you learn, 50 words and you can get all the food you need. That's all. And ask for the food correctly. And in Thailand, it's very difficult to find milk unless you ask. And almost all of the, what do they call that? The people who wear the...
Sikhs.
No, the people who are supposed to be bad from Iraq and all that, who are out to kill. Pardon? Muslims. Lots of Muslims in Asia. Tremendous amount of Muslims. Well, they do dairy. They've got goats. They've got cows. They've got milk, but they never take it to the markets. So you see somebody, wearing a Muslim outfit, and you go up and say, they always have the best meat too. I always buy my meat from them because they know how to raise those animals. They're healthy. They're hardy. The people and their animals. So I always buy from them. And I'll say, can I get some raw milk? I say in Thai, and they bring me goat's milk or cow's milk. They'll have a certain day that they'll bring it to me.
And is this also like the best prevention when you're traveling to a foreign country to not, like you were saying, that you didn't get sick, and you're saying it's because you eat eggs, and so what is it about the raw diet that helps not get sick in foreign countries?
Well, you're already used to bacteria, so when you start getting bacteria in other countries, it's not foreign to your body, so it just adapts to a new bacteria. Also, there's the issue that when somebody goes to a foreign country, they're told not to eat anything raw, so they'll eat everything cooked. Then they have no enzymes, and they'll go into diarrhea, sickness, and cold. For example, there was a movie called Latino that was shot in 1984, I guess it was, 1984, 85, and it was written and directed by Haskell Wexler. And one of my patients was the third lead in the movie, Tony Plana. And Tony Plana bought this legal-sized sheet of paper, both sides, with literature on it. It was everything was kind of like this. Everything was centered, so it didn't take up all of the page. It would have all fit onto one page. They weren't so creative in the way they designed it. was everything you should not do, and it's everything that you do on this diet. It was not to do. You don't drink the water, unless it's boiled. You don't eat any food unless it's cooked or steamed, including fruit. Even watermelon, you steam everything. If you go outside, you always wash your hands before you touch your face. It was endless about what you could not do. So he handed me that and says, "What do you think?" And I said, "Tony, if you do the opposite, if you drink the swamp water, if you put all that bacteria everywhere, you eat your raw meat, you eat your raw eggs, you get some raw dairy," and they were shooting this, and they shot it in Nicaragua. And it was about the American interference in Nicaragua, at the time, by Bush and Reagan. And and he did exactly as I said. He was the only one out of the 42 people on that set. We're talking about cast and crew. Only one who did not get sick. Robert Beltran, who was the lead, got so sick he lost 50 pounds. They had to write a whole new segment into there showing he got sick because he lost, 40, could have been more, 40, 50 pounds. Shut down the film for 2.5 months. He was so sick. And Robert did a little bit of the diet before he went down there. But he didn't eat anything raw while he was down there, and everything was processed and cooked.
Whether it's Africa, Asia, South
Doesn't
America,
matter.
it's getting that indigenous bacteria in.
It's fine. It just adapts as long as you're used to eating bacteria. You're already adapted. This whole garbage about, let's vaccinate you. But what's bacteria? Wait a minute, you're injecting disease into me, and you want me to adapt to that? And you don't want me to adapt to the natural bacteria that's in everyday life? What are you, crazy? Precisely. They are nuts. They are out of their mind.
Well, it's also for malaria and those things, so that's the same theory, same thing.
Again, yep.
So you wouldn't get malaria if you went, certainly?
I've gone to the swamps, I've swam in them, I've drank the water.
By all mosquitoes?
I don't get bit by mosquitoes very often unless I eat watermelon. And if I eat watermelon, they're on me within
But even if
5
you
or
were
6
bitten
hours.
by them, you're not...
I end up eating a piece of watermelon every time I'm in Asia. So I do get maybe 10 bites out of 2 months, which is nothing. They get eaten alive. And I've never gotten malaria. It's all absolute stupidity.
And like this whole West Nile virus thing, that whole thing.
West Nile virus and Ebola have been proved to be man-made, and so was AIDS. They use it what they did with the AIDS, they put it in the smallpox vaccine. It was given to 75 million people. Guess how many countries that forced into the world? The World Bank now runs those countries, 27 of those African countries, because they said, you've got this disease, we'll help you, but you have to pay us back. We'll give you all this medical supplies, all this chemotherapy to help your people survive this AIDS epidemic that you have. But you are indebted to us. Governments can never pay back, so guess what? They now own the resources of those 27 countries. It's a different way of playing war. No bombs. Just go in there and poison them, get them sick, and take over their assets. So now America and England, the UK, owns those banks, run that country from the UK and the United States. Not a nice thing. They don't care. And, the Ebola, according to Dr. Leonard Horowitz, he shows all the records. It shows that Ebola and which is the one you mentioned? West Nile is all created by, again, the military mission.
But as far as avoiding getting any of these things or dealing with it,
You keep away from injections. You don't let a needle get near you, and you'll never get it. It's got to be injected.
so all those cases of people in LA or whatever that was getting West Nile or wherever it was that
They were getting injections from something.
Oh, something wasn't necessary. Okay. Okay.
Joe, do you have a question?
Cholesterol, is that better than regular milk?
It depends. Colostrum is the milk produced by the cow for the first 5 days after giving birth. It's most of the fat is not in a cream form, it's in a butter form, liquid butter form. So it is much easier to digest. Remember I stated before that cream has to go through quite a process, 2/3 of it has to go through quite a process of enzymatic activity to separate the H2O from the fat to make it into a butter to lubricate and strengthen 2/3 of the body's needs. Only a 1/3 of the cream can be utilized to help the nervous system, but the other 2/3 of that fat has to be made into like a butter fat. So the first 5 days is a butter fat and not a cream. So it stabilizes that that baby as soon as it's born, that calf, as soon as it's born. It gives it 5 days to firm, solid, make things more solid in its skin and its hair, everything. And if it just had cream, it would be anemic. So
Would I be better off with regular milk?
I think both. But you having had psoriasis, and if you get, like this, I'm eating, butter and cream. I'm eating sheep's cream right now, and sheep's butter. Yeah. So you need that lubrication formula.
Why do you do that?
One a day.
Sometimes two.
Two. You will keep up two. As long as you have dryness, you need 2 a day.
So colostrum doesn't do a lot extra.
Pardon?
Colostrum is not a lot. The money you pay for the extra colostrum is not worth it.
Well, for some people it would be.
Which conditions is it recommended most for?
Digestive problems and skin problems. Those are the main. Yeah, absolutely.
How do they get it when they're not having carbs? Or are they having carbs born every week?
Oh, they've calves all year round in California.
But you said only for the first 5 days does it produce colostrum.
They have 450 cows.
Yes, but if they have a cow born, a calf born every day.
They're having cows born every week. They're having...
They are.
Well,
that's not usual, is it?
If the Amish community, they may have, in their whole community, they may have 50 calves born a week.
All the year round?
All year round, yeah.
Oh, because in our country they would have them only in the spring.
Well, they kept them breeding that way.
But they don't do that?
Naturally. Well, it's a little warmer here than it is in New Zealand. New Zealand has all those high mountains that bring a hell of a cold front.
In Melbourne Park, I just wondered.
And here in California, it's year-round. There's lots of them. There are some months, though, in winter where they don't have many calves that are born. Yeah, as far as our Amish in Pennsylvania, getting it from them.
Yeah, I know.
They're very
I
limited
just thought, how
supplies.
do they do it?
But organic pastures, they're dropping. Let's see, when I was there, they dropped 3 calves that day. No, 5. 5 that day.
When were you there?
I was there 3 years ago in December.
Oh, in the winter.
In December, yep. 3 years ago in December. First week in December.
Yeah, it's pretty cold up here.
You know, organic pastures have not delivered butter now for 4 out of the last 5 weeks. No butter.
I know. We're getting our butter from, we get all of our dairy for us, for our group, our buyers group from the Amish. We don't buy anything that's organic. We don't even carry it anymore. Because when he went to 32 degrees, you know, for everything, you know, his milk, he puts it at 30. Now he's denying it.
Yeah, he's cooling his milk too much.
Yeah. As soon as it comes out, it goes down to 32 degrees. He puts it at 32 degrees. I told people about it, and now he's lying that he doesn't do that.
What's the
But he does. Pardon?
What temperature should be set down?
It shouldn't low. Like I told him, it shouldn't go below 45 degrees.
It's 32 is
That's right. That's right. Yep. You know, if milk won't freeze at 32 degrees unless it's held there for many hours and it's not churned.
Why do they shock only that way, though? So
Bacteria, afraid of bacteria. Insane, yeah. Insane. So Mark McAfee, who runs, who owns and runs it, he put all of it in his son's name. So he doesn't own anything now because he owes me, he owes James Stewart, he owes Martin Sheen. You know, we got these people. Martin Sheen and his wife put in like $40,000, and he hasn't paid him back a dime. You know, he keeps saying, "Oh, we'll pay you, we'll pay you." He just keeps getting bigger. He goes around bragging he makes $3 million a year already, and he doesn't pay us. You know. And he went from glass to plastic, and then he went from 39 degrees to 32 degrees of chilling. You know, it just gets worse and worse and worse. And he goes around the world. He goes literally around the world bragging that he has the best dairy in the world. And he's nowhere near the Amish, any of them.
what about Green Zero? Are they pretty good?
They're very good because they are on my diet. Those farmers are on my diet. A lot of the Amish are on my diet now too. A lot of those people who are supplying us with foods are getting on the diet because they're finding us working for them.
Right.
You know? Pardon?
Amos Miller?
Amos doesn't, but some of the others around do. Amos, has talked about it, and he says he's going to start doing it. And I think he has, but he hasn't come back and says, yes, I'm doing it.
Where's Arizona?
In Arizona. Scottsdale around there. Scenic area.
I didn't realise that you said that it was cool. We didn't know that. I wish we'd all known. I was trying to support the Californian dairy.
Uh-huh. You were trying to what?
Support them, but I didn't know that they took it to 32. No, you hadn't told me. And
I said it here. It said it's the second time I've said it.
Oh, I didn't hear that. Oh, obviously I missed it. I'm sorry.
So organic pastures, that's from Whole Foods.
Yeah, it's California dairy. Yeah.
Organic pastures.
Organic pastures.
Whole Foods, right?
And he goes around. It's still better than nothing. Still better than nothing. He also goes around bragging these purely grass-fed. He feeds them grain at the time of milking. And, he was feeding them cooked grain for a while. He was giving them rolled oats, and then he was giving them a rice bran one time, and it was making the milk really bitter and nasty because there's gibberellic acid in rice bran. And it made it, this guy, even though he's raised on a dairy farm, has no clue about dairy farming. He left it as soon as he got out of high school, because all he did was milk. That's obviously all he paid attention to from his father and mother. Because when he decided to make a lot of money and a killing going into the raw organic dairy business, he saw big money there and didn't learn as he should.
What can somebody else do it in California?
Pardon?
What can somebody else do in this competition in California?
You know how much it costs to set up a dairy? Extraordinary amount of work. Extraordinary amount.
How about converting one of the other commercial Worthingtons to?
If you can get them to do it. Very difficult.
Probably more likely than someone starting up one.
Yeah. But I tried to get one of the Stuvey brothers up in Northern California. You know, Stuvey used to be the raw dairy here, and they kept promising that they would do it, and they didn't. And then Mark McAfee came around and got all this money together for him, and he did it, and now he doesn't give a shit about us. With us, he would have never been in the business.
How much did you guys?
Pardon?
How much did he need to start?
Well, altogether, we gave him about. He had already had the dairy going, but he was selling to Horizon.
Oh, okay.
But he doubled his herd, and plus he started making cheese. So we loaned him almost $100,000 altogether, and he hasn't paid, I think, but maybe $15,000 out of that.
So he's still supplying Horizon?
No. He sells every bit of everything he makes.
So where can you buy creme de la milk?
You'd have to go to Arizona to get it, or have them ship it to you. But that's why I have everything shipped to us. We truck it to us every week in L.A. But I mean, I've got these Amish people who send it to, Aruba. I've got patients in Aruba that have it shipped all the way there.
Without chilling it, too much.
Yeah.
Right.
Cool packs.
By the way, everything that's available in LA is available here. We have a co-op, so once a month, first Friday of the month we order, and then Tuesday after that we pick it up.
And you're getting the same dairy we have up there, right? So we're getting it from the Amish in Pennsylvania.
How long would the milk you supply it once a month? Will it last a month until you order it?
It'll be raw dairy never goes bad. It just turns into bitter cheese. So if you don't mind eating sour, milk, it's fine.
Can you put a little honey in it?
You can put a little honey in it. It'll last a couple of weeks without starting to turn.
But as it turns, it is a little bit sweeter.
Yeah, it's sweeter. Yes, definitely, it's sweeter, and it's more digested. The more sour it is, the more digestible it is. So it's fine. Just may not be as enjoyable. Yeah.
Get the dairy, get the yogurt, and
And once it's kefir and it separates, all you do is shake it, and it's right back, emulsified again.
even butter gets cultured butter.
Yep. And that's really good. Yes.
What's the pirate in the cultured butter though? So that you want butter milk and what's cultured but not cultured, but I don't know.
What it means is just like with kefir or yogurt, they put a bacteria in it that favors sweetness. See, you have three bacteria. You have one that digests the sugar, which is acidophilus, and you have Bulgarius, which digests the protein, and Bulgarius digests the fats, Caucasus digests the protein. Bulgarius has a tendency to lead, and when it leads, it makes everything bitter and sour because that's the fat digesting one. If you put honey in it or a culture in it that favors the acidophilus, then the acidophilus thrives more than the Bulgarius. So it makes a sweeter product, soured product. Buttermilk means that you've churned the butter, and the milk that's left is butter from churning. So it's a lactate butter. It's just like whey.
Well, that
Yeah.
I heard like from that that it's buttermilk, you've got raw buttermilk, it's done like a
Yeah, it's like whey. Whey will do the same thing.
So it's more of a distance
Yeah. Well, no, it's medicinal for certain things.
for certain, for what all the things that you
Everybody has to listen to this because you weren't here when I said it. It's for if urea builds up in the joints and the ankles or in the body, the lactate is very high in fermentation in the whey, and it helps get rid of that. Also helps digestion. Buttermilk is whey. It's just the whey from butter, not the whey from the whole milk.
So acidophilus digest sugar, Bulgaria digest, what was it?
Bulgarus digests fat. Caucasus just digests the protein.
What's bifidus?
Bifidus is just a name that they attribute to digestion. But most of that is well, you've got bifidus in milk, and bifidus helps break down fats. They're just different, names given to different. I've just given you 3, but there are probably about 20, 22, somewhere around there. Different bacteria, but those 3 are the prominent ones. Pardon? Not necessarily. Depends upon the digestive problems. I go for eggs most for digestive problems. And then cultured milk is next to be added. Because egg white and egg yolk are liquid, completely liquid. Liquids, there's hardly any digestion to be done. Milk takes a lot of digestion. Pardon?
It's liquid.
Doesn't the same thing? Not the same. It's almost like a serum. Milk is a serum, whereas egg is completely in liquid form. You ate some of what? Uh-huh. They have a whole way that they won't tell me. They don't tell me how they make those things. It's all private. They don't heat it or anything. But there's a certain way and they'll put it in certain kinds of wood containers and other containers to get that effect. And it's their Mennonite and Amish ways. And even within their communities, they don't tell each other. Like they've got one guy who makes incredible Swiss cheese and farmer cheese. Each one does differently, but they won't tell their secret how they make it. You have to. I've said all this stuff already. Yeah. Pardon? No, any kind of cheese. It's the same. There is no enzyme activity. Even in cottage cheese, it's too dry. Okay. So there's no bacteria that is alive to help utilize the enzymes. So it's an absorbent unless you eat honey with it directly. Now you can eat cheese with a milkshake and it's still, the honey is already united with and chelated and bonded with the fats and the proteins and the other sugars in the food that you're eating. So you eat cheese with a milkshake, it's not, the honey in it is not going to change the ability of the cheese to absorb and pass out without digestion. You have to put the honey and the cheese together in the mouth to do that. Listening to you over there? Yeah. No, cottage cheese isn't different. Just a little drier. But that's like if you were dead and you were half dry, are you more alive when you're half dry than completely dust? You know, a hardened leather? You know, so it's like that. Once you've reached that point of cottage cheese, there's no live bacteria in it anymore to facilitate digestion. Isn't that funny? I won't put it in the light because light has a tendency to cause the fats to go bitter. Pardon? It might keep out some of the radiation. Yeah, I put it in a dark cupboard.
Just a paper towel.
Just get more oxygen in. It'll dry out a little bit more. It gets the aerobic bacteria to grow faster. Well, mine will take a couple of days if I put a lid on it or don't put a lid on it. Yeah? Huh. Could be. Yeah, temperature is everything in some circumstances. So probably it's cooler in your cupboards maybe. Your ground's pretty wet here, so cupboards would be cooler unless you're putting in an upper cupboard. Near a heater. Do you have a question, Mike?
Yeah, I don't know if you want to ask it.
Sorry, did you finish, Lisa? Yeah. I'm sorry. Okay. Oh, and let's all give Lisa a hand for being our host. And Michael. Wait a minute. I'm still hard of hearing from when my father broke both of my eardrums. So.
How did you do that?
Well, I was autistic, so half the time, or 99% of the time, I didn't know what he was saying. So I didn't do something he wanted me to do. So he popped me in both ears. He said, "You got to listen to me," or something like that, and broke both eardrums. So I lost 60% hearing in this ear and 80% in this ear. Now I'm restored 60% in this ear and 70% in this ear.
From the diet?
Yeah. It's taken all these years. He did that when I was about 11 years old.
The bird flu thing.
Uh-huh.
And in terms of how do you avoid, what if they make it mandatory for people to take shots or that kind of thing?
Do you think that they can police that? That would be like 5 highway patrolmen handling all the traffic on 405 freeway. They're just scaring everybody by demanding it. But it's not going to happen.
And in terms of restriction of travel, like India and places like that, so that originated. That's an issue with it.
That's all bullshit, absolute bullshit. More birds have viruses now. Remember, like I said earlier, the body uses non-live substance called virus, which is a solvent. It's a soap made by the cells. The body makes that when there's too much pollution. Birds are flying in pollutions all the time. They're getting sicker and sicker. The bacteria and parasites in them are dying, and they're not cleaning out as well. So to cleanse, they're using virus. soaps to help clean their systems. Of course they have virus, but there is no virus that transforms species. They tried to pull that shit on us with the swine flu in the 70s. Oh, we're all going to get this disease from the pigs. So Ford gets on the television, gets his injection of swine flu shot. Who was our vice president? David Rockefeller. Who owned the pharmaceutical houses? David Rockefeller. $7 billion we paid for the swine flu. There was no epidemic, but they were giving out all this swine flu. What happened? Ida Honoroff, the big consumer advocate that was syndicated on something like 187 radio shows throughout the United States, consumer advocate, said this is going to kill people. There's no such thing as a swine flu. She got Dr. McBean down there in San Diego, a female MD, and they both filed suit on Ford, Rockefeller, and the federal government. With that kind of publicity, with Ida Honoroff, fronting the battle, she got all the news media to watch it. 2,300 people dropped dead within almost 3 days of getting vaccines in the first 2 weeks. They shut it down. So $7 billion of the swine flu has been in the vaults since then, and guess what they're going to relabel as the swine flu? And we just spent another $8 billion paying for the relabeling of the swine flu. And they show these pictures on the news where they're taking eggs and they're injecting them. They're making it out like they're making this whole new vaccine, and all they're going to do is relabel the swine flu. It is all about money. Nothing to do with anything else.
When they relabel, isn't that misbranding?
Absolutely. But the pharmaceutical house was great for that.
Right.
They were given 5 years to get rid of thimerosal, liquid mercury in the vaccines. They claimed they were mercury free. Lab tests show that there's almost as much mercury as there was before. And up until a couple of years ago, there was 76,000 trillion molecules of mercury per vaccine. 76,000 trillion molecules of mercury. If it takes 200 to 2,000 fat molecules or white blood cells to remove one molecule of mercury, will you ever get the mercury out of your body in your lifetime from one vaccine? Not likely. And these children are getting up to 128 by the time they're 16 years old now, depending on what state you're in. So this is massive genocide. It's massive disease. So the pharmaceutical house gets to make disease to help you take more medication to help those diseases. And it's good business, according to them. Good business sense. They don't give a shit what happens to you. And they're running the government. So now, you have to get this vaccine, or you're going to cause us all to suffer. Wait a minute, if everybody's getting a vaccine and I don't, you guys are protected. What does it matter if I get it? Hello? Does anybody get the rationale about this bullshit? If everybody's got the vaccine is protected, why are they going to worry about me getting it? If they have the vaccine, they're going to be protected.
You're setting a bad example for everybody else.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but I mean, that's the logic,
What about honey? I've got that honey when I was in Hawaii. The bread was raw. I disgusted it after like 2 days later.
Who was it?
I don't know, one of them. It was in a health food store.
Yeah, I know. One of them lies there like a rug.
Yeah. And I was going to the farmer's market, and I found a better version of the farmer's market.
Just remember, always take it and put it on your tongue and let it sit in your throat. If it eats at your throat, it burns your throat, almost starts you coughing, it is definitely heated. And that's the way I test it.
Also maybe delirious. I mean, what are you eating?
Pardon?
I'll say it's delirious, actually. Because what are you eating when you got down to the honey?
Well, there was like two factors. One was the honey. The other one, I was getting a lot of tofu. To chop up the ahis and little cubes.
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah. Well, I didn't put that much. I put some seaweed on it. So I guess there's mercury in seaweed.
No, it's the high salt.
High salt.
Cause you to be very hyperactive.
And I was living on raw chicken and ahi with my primary protein. And I did like a pound of this ahi every 2 days.
And you were eating seaweed with it every time?
Yeah, they'd have this like sprinkle, this nori sprinkle.
Yeah, well, that's salt.
Yeah.
That's what's causing your mind to go.
And then
hyperactivity.
And then I went out to the volcano, and I had the honey with that. I went out to the volcano national park, and they have all those sulfuric thermal holes.
Right.
And I was, checking out those, and then I went out for a hike, and I was just like,
oh, you breathe in some sulfur.
yeah.
Woo! And you had already had the salt, which dries out the system, and then your brain must have just closed. Closed.
Yeah, I was like,
yeah.
I felt like just.
Absolutely. Yeah, don't ever have seaweed. High in salt, dry your system and cause you to be hyperactive.
So that the nori shoots on you.
It doesn't have mercury? I thought they broke all the mercury from it.
Some, not all.
Well, they have some. And again, when it's cooked and fried like that, it's cooked.
They roast it in the fire.
Yep.
But
And it releases all the heavy metals in it. It's got mercury, then it's a free radical.
But when the seaweed is growing in the sea, it's incorporating that just like it is if you're fertilizing anything in the garden. That salt has been taken through the plant and been changed, just like the plant out here takes in all the minerals out of the soil.
But it lives in a saltwater environment.
Yeah.
That's a different environment. The concentration of sodium in that plant is very different from a plant you'll have here on the earth. You put that concentration of sodium in the soil there, and it will kill everything here.
Well, I use seaweed on plants all the time. It certainly does the opposite. It doesn't kill them at all.
Where?
I've been doing it for years.
No, I'm talking about a saltwater environment. I'm not talking about putting a little bit of
I put sacks of
mulch
seaweed around.
Yeah.
Sacks. I used to get it by the wheelbarrow, by the trailer load, and put it around plants.
Yeah, but it's not all seaweed. This never is all seaweed.
What do you mean when you put it out of the ground?
Those mulch that you buy?
No, off the beach.
You're buying it and you put it all.
I never buy it.
Picked it up and put it there.
I've done that for years. Yeah.
And what plants did you fertilize
with? 30 years. All my vegetable gardens have been done with seaweed.
And how did you mulch it?
Chopped it and put it around them. Really, I'm not
You didn't mulch it first. You just put it.
I do both. I used to make compost and I used to put it around the plants straight.
Okay, if it's composting, it'll break it down.
I understand, but I just put it around the plants, and I had friends who've done it.
If you put it on top, it's just going to dry out. It's not going to leach down into it until it breaks down.
Yeah, but you put straw on top so that it won't dry out. Otherwise, it doesn't rot down as quickly. You learn those things.
But it's got to break down to release the sodium. But how much of this is going to hit the plant?
Well, it all does, because you do it all the time, gradually. But it doesn't kill them. I don't even wash it first.
But we don't have dirt in our body to filter it out.
I realise that. But what I'm saying is that much, you're only having a little bit of kill. Is it really that bad for you with all the minerals you're getting with it?
Well, you're asking what I've seen?
Yeah.
Yes. It causes what it did with him. It causes dehydration of the brain.
Right. No, I don't use it now because you said not to, but I wondered why.
Now, the only time, like I said in the book, the only times that I suggest people eat salt is they have adrenal exhaustion. There's another situation, let's say somebody has gone into intense vomiting and diarrhea and they're not holding anything down and they're starting to lose weight and they're starting to lose consciousness, then I would use salt in a situation like that to help bring them back. And I would use salt in a mixture with whey to help bring them back, to bring the electrolytes and the salts back into the body, instead of using Pedialyte or something like that. Gatorade. That's what they do in hospitals. Gatorade. You give Gatorade to a patient?
I bet.
Hello?
So what would be the portion of salt and whey? What the cup of whey?
Oh, it would be just a pinch. Yeah. Like, 1/8 of a teaspoon to about a quart of whey.
What's the point of the salt in the bath? I don't like to use it for weird salt. You could put a little salt in it.
Well, it helps draw the toxic salts out of the body from years of eating table salt. No. It dries the skin a little bit.
Yeah.
But you put the milk in with it so it doesn't do that. So if you milk, the salt, and the vinegar in there, it's not going to cause that. Yeah.
It's great for injuries. I used to race moto and enduro on the street a lot. Every time I hit the pavement, I'd get road rash. I'd add some salt. It sucked everything out of the wounds, but you heal 3 times fast.
But that's not safe.
You might even try it for what's going on with you.
No, I don't want to do it because it will stop it.
Okay.
And I don't want to stop it. I want all that chemicals, all that AZT out of my body. It's the whole reason I did it. So I'm not going to stop it.
Why would it stop it? Just by pulling it out a bit faster?
No. When it starts mixing with the skin, then the skin changes its whole ability to release. So I found that it stops detoxification, not helps implement. If you put it directly on. If you put it in, getting in bath water
in the bath.
is diluted enough, it'll help pull it out of your system.
Yeah, that's what I'm
And I do that. I get into a hot tub, several times a day.
That's what I thought when you said you don't put it in. That's why I was confused.
No. He said put it right on it. That's what I thought he said.
No, there's 2 different things. What you're saying is detoxification. What I was talking about is healing the wound.
Oh, yeah.
Healing,
Yeah, you put it in. You put the 2 ounces of salt and 4 ounces of salt in the bath.
No, I put 2 tablespoons.
Now,
only 2 tablespoons. 2 ounces of vinegar. Or 3 to 4 tablespoons of vinegar and 2 tablespoons of salt. And 1.5 to 2 cups of milk.
Yeah.
Were you finished with your question?
Yeah, no, you covered it very thoroughly.
Okay, good. David, do you have a question? Dave, right?
Dave.
Okay.
When I did about a 3-month colon cleansing, right before it happened, right before I mixed. And then I kind of started changing to drinking a lot of milk. And went into the bathroom, I feel really hard, like a brick. So butter will help that.
Yeah, well, you destroyed you colon cleanse destroyed all the bacteria.
And I washed it out.
Absolutely. Destroyed it.
So to rebuild, and then milk, eating milk and the optimal
probiotic. Yeah, it doesn't really work. It's not the same bacteria. Worm casings isn't the same as your own bacteria, E. coli. So if you want to...
What would rebuild
eating shit, buffalo shit or, cow shit, something like that would get it quicker. If you want to do it, another way, just take some soured milk and, put it up there as a suppository, like you would a light enema. Or you use soured milk and you put it up in there and you keep it in you. And that would help build the E. coli again quickly. You could feed on it. High meat is also helpful because it's broken down to a point where the bacteria can feed on it readily by the time it gets to the bowel. You can do it in about 2 weeks if you don't put it in the refrigerator. Yeah, I explained how to do that in the recipe there. You have to open it every 2 days instead of every 3 to 4. Do you have questions, Teresa?
No, I'm trying to figure out how to make it simple. I feel like I have a couple short questions and then one that I'd like to elaborate. So sun exposure, is that fine?
Yes, sun is very important. You see me out here getting as much.
Yeah, that's kind of right. And then wheat germ, do you like wheat germ?
Wheat germ, like I said in the book, there's no pure wheat germ.
And
they have to solvent process it or heat process.
And then the whole deal with how much water and getting it in glass.
Pardon?
How much water do you recommend people hydrate with? How often? And how do you best sources of glass water?
Well, any of your water, like Gerolsteiner is my favorite, but that's higher in carbon dioxide, and it's the carbon dioxide from the well. It looks like now Perrier is no longer buying the gas that they've lost in their well from them, so they're using an artificial.
Really? So Ixnay on the area?
Yeah. So there's still Gerolsteiner, there's Romlusa, San Pellegrino.
And sometimes that will come in plastic, but you don't recommend any plastic.
I don't get anything. I don't get any water in plastic.
And some water's
the worst thing you could do besides the acid juices in plastic.
So hard to